began our preaching series on Free Indeed, dealing with the challenges of life and how we can get caught up and live with crutches, as I call it, the things that we reach to deal with the pain in our lives. The response that we received from many of you as a result, honestly, was a good overwhelm. Because we got to the place where we were having an honest dialogue with one another to talk about, this is who I am, and this is what I deal with, and this is what I struggle with. As we were putting this together, one of our own brothers among us, Ronald, I had the opportunity to travel to Michigan State to listen to him share his testimony. And it was very heart-rendering and very open, and I think really his story really epitomizes what I preached about last week, of if we're going to be a church that supports one another, we have to be in a safe space where we can speak our truth. And although Ronald has shared this before, but not quite in the way he's done in the past. And so I invite you to have your prayerful energy to support our brother as he comes forth to share his testimony. Without further ado, Ronald Moore.
Okay. Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. You know, I'm used to seeing the back of your heads. Because I normally sit in the back so I can go to the kitchen and also get to hang out with my friend Marcia. Back there, you Marcia? So I want to thank Reverend Ronald for the opportunity to talk about freedom from addiction as part of the Free Indeed series. And I want to open with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you. I want to begin by reading again one of the scriptures that was just read to you, because it's touched me so much as I believe it relates to addiction. So again, 1 Corinthians 10th chapter, verses 12 and 13. If you think you are standing strong, be careful, for you too may fall into the same sin. But remember that the temptations that come in your life are no different from what others experience. And God is faithful and will keep the temptation from becoming so strong that you can't stand up against them. When you are tempted, God will show you a way out so that you will not give in to it. These are the words of the Apostle Paul, who encouraged the Corinthians about temptation. He said, first, temptations happen to everyone, so don't feel singled out. Second, others have resisted temptation, and so can you. Third, any temptation can be resisted because God will show you a way out. I'm going to say that one more time. First, temptations happen to everyone, so don't feel singled out. Second, others have resisted temptation, and so can you. Third, any temptation can be resisted because God will show you a way out. So I'd like for you to keep those 3 points in mind as I share with you my story. I intend to be very candid with you about my journey with addiction. Reverend Ronald mentioned last Sunday about a church being where we can be honest with one another and real about the issues we struggle with. I've had a long journey, and I am now living proof that God's power of protection is real. And it is what I rely upon each day. Amen. And I am not on this journey alone. There is a power that comes from no longer hiding in the shadows of shame and guilt and receiving the help that is available to you. No longer am I in the closet about many things. And I stand here this morning sharing my freedom from addiction. I want to take you to a Monday morning in 1989. I was the Hewlett-Packard, New York area human resources manager based in Paramus, New Jersey. I had to fire an employee who had relapsed on crack cocaine. He was crying in my office about how much crack had ruined his life. His girlfriend had introduced him to it, and he was crying his eyes out. It was very surreal for me also. I plainly saw myself sitting there crying. I could hear his words, but I saw me sitting there. The vision was so real, it was like a gift from God. I had smoked crack all weekend. It was so clear to me that I was going to be sitting in that seat crying if I continued on my path. My definition of addiction is any type of anesthesia for feelings that you don't want to feel, and, this is the key point, and makes your life unmanageable. The drug can be illegal substances, food, tobacco, gambling, sex, working out, shopping, any activity that makes your life unmanageable and you can't stop. So when I use the term drugs, there are specific ones relative to my story, but perhaps you can substitute for what may be relevant for you or someone in your life. A little bit of my history. I am the product of the real Southwest Detroit. I grew up 4 streets from River Rouge and close to a place called Ecorse, which some people have heard. My mother, who is here today, still lives in the house that we moved in when I was in the 3rd grade. And then let me do a shout out, November 30th, my mom turns 89. Happy birthday. And has always been my biggest supporter, my biggest ally. So between grad and undergrad at Michigan State University, I worked for Sears. After training in Milwaukee, I was the shoe department manager in Racine, Wisconsin. Getting off the freeway at the Racine exit at that time, all I could see was cornfields. And, and that was the last time I cried uncontrollably. But that's another story. So 2 years later, 1977, I returned to Michigan State for graduate school. Then I joined HP in 1979 and moved to Sunnyvale, California, where I stayed for 3 years. Then 4 years in St. Louis, Missouri, 8 years in Hoboken, New Jersey, and 12 years in Atlanta. Each move represented a promotion. Each move meant starting over. There was a lot of loneliness adjusting to new cities. Being in the closet, being single, drugs and alcohol provided the anesthesia for those times. And in those times, gay bars were the safest place to meet people. So alcohol was a big part of it. And drugs, especially marijuana, were more acceptable then than today. Some people would say that I was a functional drug addict. I didn't do a lot of things people associate with addiction. I didn't do any jail time. I wasn't fired from a job. I didn't go to rehab. I didn't steal from my family. However, I know that I was not functional. I could have done more and done better if I was not using drugs. I have no doubt that if I continued with active drug use, I would have experienced more lows and more drama. One thing that is mentioned over and over in 12-step groups, and I have seen come true over and over, Active addiction leads to jails, institutions such as rehabs or hospitals, or death. Active addiction leads to jails, institutions, or death, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. I'll always remember my good friend Cleveland, who we call Butch. So Butch, we met at Cass Tech. We ended up in Michigan State together, and we pledged the fraternity together. Our sophomore year, we were suite mates in a dorm, so it meant we shared bathrooms. We shared a bathroom between the two rooms. During that year, I was one of 4 fraternity brothers in Holden Hall. I was a resident assistant. The other 3 sold weed the whole year. So we smoked every day, and I never had to pay. We felt the dorm food would only taste good if we had a buzz. The following year, Butch and I lived next door to each other with other frat brothers in off-campus housing. We were close friends, and we did a lot of drugs together. I moved out of state. He became an art teacher at Osborne High in northeast Detroit, until his crack pipe fell out of his pocket in front of his class. He eventually went to Jackson State Prison for robbery. After being released, he was found hanging over the John C. Lodge Freeway one morning. Suicide or murder by drug dealers, we'll never know. Back to my story. I had 2 New York City chapters. The first was 1986 to 94. I was promoted from St. Louis to become the New York area HR manager. And I lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the river from Manhattan. I love New York City. And I did everything I had dreamed of. I saw James Earl Jones on Broadway in Fences, Whoopi Goldberg at Carnegie Hall, a Paul Simon concert in Central Park. I just did it. Christopher Street was the main street in Greenwich Village, which was the heart of the gay community. There's a bar called the Monster across the street from the Stonewall Inn, the famous Stonewall Inn. And then there were 2 or 3 bars in each of the 3 or 4 blocks to the river, to the Hudson River, from the Monster to the Hudson River. So I would drink my way from the Monster to the river. Johnny Walker Red on the rocks. I could say it like it was one word. That was my drink. I met some young, good-looking guys one night in a park near my condo in Hoboken, and they asked me if I smoked. Assuming they meant marijuana, I said, sure. Then they pulled out a crack pipe. I didn't back down. You know, I had smoked cocaine once or twice over years and was not instantly hooked, but this was different. When I blew that smoke out, I didn't have a care in the world. I was on top of the world for 5 or 6 minutes. And then I wanted to go back. So I was always chasing that first high. That was the beginning. Now, of course, I had heard all about the dangers of crack. But remember, I had been using drugs since I was 18. I had earned a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees. At that point, 10 years with Hewlett-Packard, one of the best companies in the country at that time. So of course, I wasn't an addict. So I managed the crack use, only on weekends. My new friends would go into certain Manhattan buildings with my money and come out with the drugs. I never had a crack pipe. Oh, by the way, if they were going to these buildings, I'd be waiting outside and my Hewlett-Packard provided 4 tours. There was an HP employee somewhere in the country that got arrested buying drugs with an HP company car. So all HR managers had to send out a memo saying, anyone using a company car in illegal transactions will be terminated. Signed, Ronald Moore. Now, weekday use would be marijuana, beer, wine, Johnny Walker Red, looking back though, I had to have something every day to take the edge off the day. Not to the point of being impaired, or so I thought. But once again, the real question is, does it make your life unmanageable? You know, perhaps you have a drink when you get home, and no big deal. I never had one of anything. Deep down, I couldn't justify the crack use. The places I went, the people I dealt with, I knew it was just plain wrong. One weekday evening, my friend stopped by and said, "We have the money, it's our treat this time. You keep your money, we're gonna buy it." So it turned out to be multiple trips all night, back and forth. And then the next morning, we're returning from our last run to Manhattan, and people are going to work. I knew I couldn't go to work that day, and I knew I had crossed the line from just weekend use. Returning to the 3 points that I mentioned earlier, based on the Apostle Paul's words in Corinthians. First, temptations happen to everyone. Others have resisted temptations, and so can you. And any temptation can be resisted because God will show you a way out. I want to expand upon those points by sharing with you how God helped me find a way out of the darkness I found myself in. I first needed to recognize the people and the situations that gave me trouble. I then had to learn how to run, not walk, from the things that I knew were wrong. I also had to choose to do what was right by living with integrity and being honest with myself. I had to learn how to pray for God's help. And for real, I don't mean a quick half-hearted prayer. I mean the kind of praying where I had to be real before God and believing that God wanted to help me out. Lastly, I learned to tell the truth about my feelings. First, at meetings. 12-step meetings are spiritual in the sense that people around the world are sitting in often church basements telling things to strangers that they can't even tell their family or best friend. The anonymity is what makes it safe. And this is the essence of the 12-step model. Step 1 is admitting that you are powerless over your addiction. It's a real paradox. When you admit that you're powerless, you gain power. If I got in the ring with Muhammad Ali in his prime, I was going to get beat down. Okay? It didn't matter how often I worked out. It didn't matter how much coaching I got. It didn't matter how much rope I jumped. I was going to get beat. The only way to avoid getting beat was to not get in the ring. That's when I had power. So that is the first step, admitting that you're powerless over your addiction. So I want to conclude with sharing about my victory, my freedom, my way out. So, you know, I've always volunteered a lot of things, particularly using the skills that I used at work. So at the time, I was a volunteer for the Gay and Lesbian Switchboard in New York City. At that time, we hadn't evolved enough to recognize all the members of our community. So we didn't have the B and the T and the Q. But one thing that was helpful at that time is that the switchboard had a list on the wall of gay-friendly churches. And I thought, well, maybe I should try church again. They're gay-friendly. So I copied down the first five churches. The first one was the Riverside Church in New York City, and I never went any further after that. After my first Riverside service, I went downstairs for the coffee hour, and there were tables of church groups: the prison ministry group, the nuclear disarmament group, the support the homeless group, the women's group, and Maranatha, the gay and lesbian support group. I was home. I had found my tribe. I didn't realize then God was giving me a way out. I called Al, a friend, a fraternity brother, who was a New Jersey native and went to Michigan State and then moved back. After I moved there, we ran into each other in a gay bar. Surprise, you know. But I found out that he was in recovery. He did not drink or drug anymore. So of course, I didn't really want to hang out with him. Yeah. So, but when I was in my midst of my darkness, I called him and said, "How did you stop?" And his answer, "Go to a meeting." Okay. So I went to the Riverside Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and they welcomed me warmly. The suggestion was to get a temporary sponsor, and I was told to pick a man so there wouldn't be any sexual issues. Okay. I never went back. So I went to NA meetings at the LGBT Center in the village. Al had also told me about an AA meeting in Harlem. It was called Found a Way. It was an AA meeting started in 1985 by black gay men who didn't feel totally comfortable in the Harlem AA meetings or, well, the gay AA meetings. And in that meeting, I heard my story in the voices of other black gay men. The combination of NA in the village and AA in Harlem gave me a totally new set of people and places to go. So with the grace of God and day at a time, this past June 26th, I celebrated 29 years of drug use. I look back and I realized that was the beginning of the journey, not the end. Once I stopped the anesthesia, I had to deal with the feelings that I had been numbing myself from. Not just being gay, but just low self-esteem, fear of intimacy, et cetera, et cetera. You know, growing up in Detroit, I couldn't sing, I couldn't play basketball, you know. I got good grades, so that just gave me nerd status, you know. So I always felt less than. Also, understanding what the Bible says and doesn't say about homosexuality was a big step towards self-love. And 3 excellent therapists over the years helped me to redefine how I saw myself and how I saw the world. You know, forgiveness, empathy, freed me from my resentments and even hatreds. Freedom from addiction opened the door to freedom from victimology, internalized homophobia, and other negative forces. Today, I celebrate the freedom to love me as I am. Amen. Freedom to love others unconditionally. Amen. Freedom to thank God for all the people who have crossed my path. Freedom to know that I keep what I have by giving it away. Freedom in knowing that feelings are not fatal, they just feel that way. And freedom to know that I am as sick as my secrets.